मैं आज की क्लास की डिस्कशन शुरू कर रहा हूं एनालिसिस ऑफ कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर प्रपोज्ड इन द बजट के साथ। वहां से क्लास की डिस्कशन शुरू कर रहा हूं। आज की क्लास हम बहुत लंबा, बहुत ज़्यादा डिटेल नहीं जा रहे, कुछ छोटी चीज़ें कवर करनी है। माई पर्पस ऑफ स्टार्टिंग दिस क्लास और स्टार्टिंग दिस डिस्कशन इज to cover everything in these 3 videos that they can possibly ask you from budget। जो बजट एनालिसिस के 3 वीडियोस में मैं कोशिश ये कर रहा हूं कि जो भी संभव प्रश्न आ सकते हैं वो संभव प्रश्न यहीं पे हमारे तरफ से क्रियान्वित हो जाएं। ऐसा ना हो कि हम उन प्रश्नों को लेकर बाद में परेशानी में आए। तो अभी मेरी यही कोशिश है, my purpose is to make sure that all possible questions that they can ask you in the exam, we can try covering that, prelims and mains both. So if you can see these 3 videos, this is the 3rd and last video on budget, that is the session. If you can see these 3 sessions and if you can make small snippets, we have given you the summary already, and any doubts feel free to approach me. We will be willing to then be in a situation where till your mains you will not need any further reference on budget. That is the objective. कोशिश यही है कि mains तक फिर कोई ज़रूरत ना पड़े आपको। So now what I am planning to do in this, जो अभी करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ वो ये है that we will do discussion on capital expenditure in the budget and analysis on that. We will also talk about the main taxation proposals and their implications. Also, what is the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, etc. of the government and what does it mean? And then third, and a small discussion on the proposal of central bank digital currency. What can be the possible benefits and what can be the possible challenges? These three discussions we will do, which hopefully should wind up for you the idea. Some of you had asked me that to speak few things on environment related issues in budget. I will talk to you on that, but if you combine all the aspects that I have covered with you, those talks in the budget on environment related things are already covered with you. But still I will give you 3-4 points that in case you have to write about what has the budget done regarding improvement in environmental generation and all, you should be able to answer that. Yeah, nice. Good evening all of you for joining here. अरे विकास, तुम्हारी बात कैसे मना कर सकता हूँ? देखो रिपीट करके बताया तुम्हें मैंने सब कुछ। आप लोगों को मना कैसे करूँ मैं कुछ? So I hope you could hear me entirely. And let's get going now. Let us see. We talk about analysis of capital expenditure proposed in the budget. अब ये क्यों इतना जबरदस्त धमाकेदार बात हो गई? किस बात को लेके इतना जबरदस्त हंगामा है? Why are we talking about capital expenditure so much? For a reason. See, in the budget 2020-21, जो आज से 2 साल पहले का बजट था, the revised estimates, और मैं आपको बता चुका हूं, मुझे उम्मीद है आप सबको याद होगा, revised estimate मतलब वो estimate जो बताता है कि आपने actually कितना खर्च किया, that is your revised estimate. The estimate that tells you that how much did you spend actually. So the revised estimate was around 4,26,000 crore, which was quite a high amount, no doubt, but was still in a normal tone. The first change happened in 2021-22 in the revised estimate of 2021-22. This figure has jumped from 4,26,000 crore to 6,02,000 crore. मैं आपको approximate numbers दे रहा हूँ, इनके अंदर hundreds में भी numbers हैं, but we don't need that. आपको analysis करना है बस. And now the budgetary estimate of 2022-23 says that this will be around 7,50,000 crore. Now that's a huge jump. अगर आप इसको कंपेयर करो हम कहाँ थे 2 साल पहले, तो ये जबरदस्त जंप है. This is a big jump on capital expenditure pattern. Now what is a capital expenditure? So whenever you think about capital expenditure, whenever we use this word capital expenditure in the budget is any expenditure which creates an asset, any expenditure which creates an asset or reduces liability, which creates assets or reduces liability. या तो कोई नया asset बनाए जैसे स्कूल की बिल्डिंग बना दी, रोड बना दिया, ब्रिजेस बना दिए, रेलवे प्लेटफॉर्म बना दिए, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी जनरेशन यूनिट्स बना दिए, सोलर पावर जनरेशन यूनिट्स बना दिए. सो an expenditure which creates assets, developing school buildings, making roads, making bridges, making railway platforms, making railway lines, developing safety precautions on railways, developing electricity generation units, communication centers, storehouses, warehousing, cold storage chain. All that counts under capital expenditure of the government because it is creating an asset. तो जो भी चीज या तो एक बड़ा असेट बनाए जो प्रोडक्शन कैपेसिटी को ऐड कर सके और रिड्यूसेस लायबिलिटी, जो पुराने लोन हैं उन्हें वापस कर दो. रिड्यूसेस लायबिलिटी, जो पुराने लोन हैं जिस पे आपके पैसे खर्च होते हैं इंटरेस्ट वगैरह पे, वो वापस कर दो. यू रिड्यूस द लायबिलिटी, पे बैक योर ओल्ड बोरोइंग्स which take away your interest rates from you. So that is the idea of capex, capital expenditure. Now what is the relevance of capex? ये capex का importance क्या है? The relevance or importance of capex is, that's very important to remember. The relevance is that it adds to production capacity of the economy. So remember, whenever we talk about capex, जब भी बात करें capital expenditure की, so this capex, what it does, adds to production capacity of economy. You can produce more if you have better roads, if you have better electricity and so on. Second, attracts private expenditure, investment. If you have spent more on your capital formation, then you will attract more private investment in your economy. If you have spent on capital formation, then you will attract more private investment in your economy. So attracts private investment. Also, it creates employment, creates or contributes to employment generation. That is another factor that it is doing, that it adds to production capacity, attracts private investment and creates or contributes to employment generation. Because remember, simple सी बात सोचना, बहुत ज़्यादा complicated analysis में मत जाना. कभी कभी मैं अखबार के आर्टिकल पढ़ता हूँ तो इतना complicated कर देते हैं वो analysis को कि मुझे लगता है छोटी सी बात है, इतना क्यों घुमा रहे हैं. So don't go into too much of complications in analysis. Think like this. If I as a government decide to spend money on building roads, then how will I build roads? I will hire people, I will buy cement, I will buy bitumen, coal and so on, which will mean I'm buying from the market. अब मैं सीमेंट खरीदूंगा तो किसी कंपनी से खरीदूंगा तो उनकी इनकम बढ़ी, उनको ऑर्डर्स मिले, वो प्रोडक्शन बढ़ाएंगे. मैं कोल खरीदूंगा तो कहीं अपने मार्केट से खरीदूंगा, उनका प्रोडक्शन बढ़ा. मैं अगर कंस्ट्रक्शन मटेरियल खरीदूंगा, कंस्ट्रक्शन इक्विपमेंट खरीदूंगा तो कहीं से मार्केट से खरीदूंगा. तो जैसे ये कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्क से प्रोडक्शन बढ़ा और प्रोडक्शन के साथ एम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ी, एक्सपेंडिचर्स बढ़े, इन्वेस्टमेंट्स बढ़ी. That is the link that the private investments also start getting attracted, employment generation happens, production capacity of the economy rises. All that is the possibility with capital expenditure. That is why capital expenditure is considered as one of the better expenditures done by the government. If capital expenditure is increased, it is considered as one of the better expenditures done by the government. And this year, capital expenditure has increased by 24%. 24% increase in capital expenditure from the revised estimates. Prelims के point of view से ये याद रखोगे. ये टेबल में टाइम पास करने के लिए बिल्कुल नहीं बना रहा हूं. ये टेबल इसलिए ड्रॉ कर रहा हूं कि आपको आइडिया रहे. प्रीलिम्स में आपको स्टेटमेंट देंगे. They will give you a statement that capital expenditure has been rising in India continuously for 3 years. Capital expenditure has been falling in India continuously for 3 years. True, false. पूछने की बात करेंगे. Revised the budgetary estimate of capital expenditure is 24% higher than the revised estimate. That kind of a statement they give you, क्योंकि ये 24% वाली बात बार बार अखबारों में आ रही है. So whatever comes continuously in the newspapers etc, ये तुम्हें जरूर पता होना चाहिए. That whatever is there in the newspaper on a continuous basis, you should have basic idea on that. So coming to this, it adds to production capacity, attracts private investment, creates to employment generation, and improves efficiency in the use of resources in the economy. So that is the other thing it does. Improves efficiency, that is the fourth thing it does. Improves efficiency of economy. Why? Because more capital will mean workers will find it easier to produce. More capital will mean firms will find it easier to produce. So adds to efficiency of economy, which helps in reducing cost and improving quality. That is what it does. It helps in reducing cost and improving quality of production. तो अगर मेक इन इंडिया भी करना है तो जब तक आपका मूलभूत ढांचा ठीक नहीं होगा, as long as your basic infrastructure is not in shape, how will you do good make in India? तो आपका जो बेसिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, जिसे आधारभूत ढांचा कहते हैं हम, जब तक वो ठीक नहीं है तब तक आपका इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, आपका क्या मेक इन इंडिया भी सक्सेसफुल नहीं हो सकता. सो यू कैन कट डाउन ऑन कॉस्ट, इंप्रूव क्वालिटी. सोचो अगर आपके स्टोर हाउसेज हैं तो वेस्टेज कम होगा, रोड्स अच्छी बनी हुई हैं तो ट्रांसपोर्टेशन कॉस्ट कम होगा, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी रेगुलर आता है तो प्राइवेट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी पे खर्चा कम होगा. अगर मन में ये आ रहा है कि कैसे भाई खर्चा कम होगा, हाउ विल इट रिड्यूस कॉस्ट? So I was giving you that example that it will reduce cost by better connectivity, better storage, better electricity generation, etc. This is your basic idea on capital expenditure, the benefits. Now, where has the government or where should the government remain conscious? कौन से वो जगह हैं जहां सरकार को थोड़ा conscious रहना पड़ेगा? So when you look at it, yes, Rahul, you have asked me a correct question. I will be discussing it with you. Good evening, all of you who are joining me now. Good to have you all together with me. So let us see. Now see, there are certain challenges government should keep in mind when it comes to capital expenditure and the movement on that. कुछ challenges हैं जो सरकार को दिमाग में रखना चाहिए. So when we look at that, challenges. One, quality of capital expenditure. Is very important. That is, type of assets created, their long-term utility, and their contribution to production capacity should be properly evaluated. एक तो ये बात बहुत ज़रूरी है जो आप हमें दिमाग में रखना है, किस तरह का asset create कर रहे हैं? What kind of asset are we creating? The quality of capital expenditure is important. For example, if you are creating a road, is it going to be a durable road? If you are giving people accessibility to electricity, will they also get the benefit of maintenance and repair? So if you are giving an asset to the people, अगर आप capital expenditure कर रहे हो, तो उस capital expenditure की sustainability कितनी है? कितने दिनों तक वो साथ देगा लोगों का, प्रोडक्शन कैपेसिटी में बढ़ोतरी कितनी करेगा, so for how long will it be sustainable, how much it will contribute to production capacity in the market. All that is very important when you look at quality of capital expenditure. So if you are making a capital expenditure where the type or the quality of asset is not very good, then that expenditure will not give you a lot of benefit in the long run. अगर आप कोई ऐसा खर्चा कर रहे हो कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर में जिसमें आपने सड़क तो बनवा दी लेकिन वो सड़क अगले मॉनसून में ढह भी जाएगी, या आपने बांध बनवा दिया वो बांध गिर जाएगा, या आपने इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का यूनिट तो दे दिया लेकिन वहां बिजली नहीं आती कभी, तो फिर ऐसे कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर से फायदा नहीं होगा. That kind of capital expenditure will not help. That is first point that has to be understood. The second is clarity should be there on creation of asset and reduction of liability. For example, 51,000 crore rupees provisioned for 21-22 is to pay back the old loans, is to pay back the old loans of Air India, is to pay back the old loans of Air India. इससे प्रोडक्शन कुछ नहीं होगा. एयर इंडिया को जो हमने सेल किया है उसके पुराने लोन्स बेचने के लिए 51,000 करोड़ रुपए प्रोविजन किए हैं, बट दैट विल नॉट कंट्रीब्यूट टू प्रोडक्शन. तो अगर हम आंख बंद करके कहें कि इतना खर्चा हुआ और उससे प्रोडक्शन ही बढ़ेगा तो वो गलत हो जाएगा. So it will not contribute to production. So that is another thing, that clarity should be there on creation of asset and reduction of liability. For example, 51,000 crore provisioned for 21-22 is to pay back the old loans of Air India, which will not contribute in any ways to production. So we should be conscious कि ये तो पुराने लोन लौटा रहे हैं हम, तो अगर पुराने लोन लौटा रहे हैं तो ये पहले होना चाहिए था, चलो अब कर रहे हैं अच्छा कर रहे हैं, लेकिन इससे बढ़ोतरी नहीं होगी प्रोडक्शन कैपेसिटी में. ये तो पहले का टंटा था जिसको साफ कर रहे हैं. Alright, so please be careful that paying back old loan will not create new production capacity. Good, we are paying it back, we are not carrying it forward, but we should not confuse it that this is adding to production capacity of India. No, there were some legacy issues. Air India was a legacy issue. पहले से चलता आ रहा था ये दिक्कत, इसे खत्म करने की बात है. लेकिन इसको पे बैक करने से आज की प्रोडक्शन कैपेसिटी बढ़ नहीं जाएगी. So that is the other factor that we see when it comes to the asset creation. Then remember, the third factor that we should keep in mind is employment generation at a fast pace is a good policy objective, but it also requires adding to skill of workers and creating higher production of necessities like food, fuel, shelter, etc., whose demand will rise with higher income, putting inflationary pressure. तो लोगों को नौकरी देना तो अच्छी बात है, इसमें तो कोई दो राय ही नहीं हो सकती, लेकिन नौकरी देने के साथ साथ दो बातों का ख्याल रखना पड़ेगा. Add to skill of the workers. You can't make them laborers for life. So you will have to give them some better skill. We can't have them as workers or laborers for life. There has to be some better skill given to them, and then create higher production of necessities like food, fuel, shelter, because their demand will rise. If you do not increase their supply, then that will mean inflationary pressure, which is already there in the economy, can also increase. So we should be managing the economy in that sense as good as possible. We should be managing. Now that is missing at the moment. We don't know how we are managing it, or there is no plan expressed by the government about how they will be managing it. Ideally there should be a plan wholesome. सब चीजों को लेकर चलना पड़ेगा और हर चीज का plan expressed होना चाहिए. ये मेरा suggestion है again. That should be kept. So these are the 2-3 things which we have to be careful about in our capital expenditure. Now remember, one facet further of capital expenditure is, एक जो और facet है, in this year's budget the government has said that capital expenditure will be increased to 7,50,000 crore, out of which 1 lakh crore will be loans to the state government, because states are in a better position to execute the plan, no doubt about it. But that is where we have seen last year also that many projects are under implemented till now. So I'm just taking you into that small discussion, and that will finish us on capital expenditure discussion. So please understand this. Role of states in capital expenditure. So remember, in 2021-22, government had provisioned 5,50,000 crore rupees in the budget. Government had provisioned 5,50,000 crore, just giving you an estimate. It was actually 5,48,000 crore rupees, but I'm rounding it off. So 5,50,000 crore rupees in the budgetary estimate later extended to 6,04,000 crore rupees in revised estimate, but till January 2022 it could not spend even 70% of the budgeted amount. Now it is expected that in the next 2 months a lot of expenditure will happen, but point is that till January we could not spend even 70% of the budgeted amount, and therefore in 2022-23 government has allowed the state governments, central government has allowed, of course, state government to take loans up to rupees 1 lakh crore. Now this is a huge increase for capital expenditure for 50 years at 0% interest rate. You know, that is what the government has allowed. The government has allowed the state governments that, okay, now what we do is you take loans for up to 50 years for the purpose of making capital expenditure at 0%, you know, and remember, this loan is over and above the budgetary permission of loans up to 3.5% of GDP plus 0.5% of GDP of state if it has done electricity reforms. You know, loans up to 3.5% of GDP plus 0.5% of GDP of state if it has done electricity reforms. आप मेरी बात समझिएगा, यहाँ ये प्रीलिम्स और मेंस दोनों के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से थोड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है. The government has said the state governments can borrow up to 1 lakh crore rupees next year, that is the coming year, and this will be for 50 years at 0% interest. And this loan will be above what is already allowed. Central government has allowed the state governments to borrow up to 3.5% of their state GDP, plus they can borrow another 0.5% of their state GDP if they have done some electricity reforms. तो अगर उन्होंने इलेक्ट्रिसिटी रिफॉर्म कर लिया है तो साथ में 3.5% ऑफ स्टेट जीडीपी तो वो ऑलरेडी बोरो कर सकते हैं, और उसके ऊपर 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए तक की बोरोइंग्स हो सकती हैं सभी स्टेट्स को मिलाकर. ये नहीं कि एक स्टेट इतना बोरो कर ले. All states together can borrow up to 1 lakh crore rupees, and this will be given by the central government, but for the purpose of capital expenditure. This will be given by the central government, but for the purpose of capital expenditure. Again, the objective is to improve center-state relations. More important, for better execution of projects. So the main reason is that state government has to implement the project. State government has to implement the project, and this freedom to borrow and spend on their own chosen project will encourage implementation. This freedom to borrow and spend on their own chosen project will encourage implementation. Of course, some people have also commented that center-state relations can improve. Some states are saying that it is putting borrowing burden on us, but that will depend on how much they borrow and what projects they execute. Because if a state executes good projects, then the return will come to the state itself. अगर एक state अच्छा capital development करता है अपने यहाँ, तो returns उनके पास ही आएंगे. इसमें एक ही बात है कि अब central government या तो central sector schemes ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लगाए भारत के गरीब देशों states में, राज्यों में, और नहीं तो ये लोन भी अमीर राज्य लेंगे और उन्हीं में ज़्यादा खर्चा भी करेगी अगर केंद्र सरकार, तो भारत के अंदर की इनइक्वालिटी बढ़ने का डर है. I am repeating my point. These are all nicer things of life. But one thing is now, since the states have the freedom to take loan for capital expenditure, Government of India should try that more expenditure on capital is done by the government through central sector schemes in those states which are underdeveloped, because they will have less capacity to borrow more and spend on projects. And it should be more about the states which are doing good, which should be doing the borrowing part and then spending for their own execution. Another is implementation issues. That's why I started it by saying that how even last year a lot of money was given but not utilized. तो बहुत पैसा दे दो और लोग उसे खर्च ही नहीं कर पा रहे, तो ये भी कोई अच्छी बात थोड़ी है. You can give a lot of money to people, but if the states are unable to spend it, if your central government is unable to implement the program, then sanctioning money will not help. मैं अपने बेटे को बोलूं, बेटा मैं तेरी पढ़ाई पे 1 लाख रुपया खर्च करूंगा, जो किताबें चाहिए खरीद ले, और बेटे को पता ही नहीं कौन सी किताब खरीदनी है, तो क्या होगा उस 1 लाख रुपए का? साल के आखिर में आके बोलेगा पापा रख लो अपने 80,000 रुपए, 20,000 की किताब किसी तरह जुगाड़ कर पाया हूं. यही हालत कुछ यहां हो रही है. It's a similar story happening here, that central government is sanctioning money, but somehow the departments don't know how to invest them well, and that is another problem that we should take care of. Central government will have to make better plans. Hopefully Gati Shakti can play a role in better implementation and faster execution of the project. So this is on capital expenditure that you should keep in mind. These are the discussions on capital expenditure that you should keep in mind. Then I take you into second discussion of the day, that is tax proposals and revenue of the government. सरकार के क्या टैक्स प्रपोजल्स हैं इस बार, और रेवेन्यू ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट पे क्या बदलाव लाने की बात हो रही है. Thank you all for giving me these wonderful messages. Yes, Surbhi, why not? Fiscal management, I'll give you an example. Okay, Palak, China is an example of such a thing. Thank you, ABC. It is provisioned in the budget of 21-22, Shubham, not 22-23. In fact, the other day, Abhishek had asked me a question on agriculture. I have confirmed it. What I gave you was fine. 2,37,000 crore has been provisioned for last year. Unfortunately, newspapers like Hindustan Times and Mint, the reporters did not understand it, and they have said it is provisioned for next year. No, last year 2,37,000 crore, this year 2,46,000 crore. थोड़ी बहुत इकोनॉमिक्स ही जानता हूं, but आपने उस दिन पूछा था तो मैंने कन्विंस करने के लिए खुद को फिर से देख लिए वो नंबर्स. No, we imply not only wheat and rice, Princey, we also imply more and more pulses, etc. That is the aspect of it. Correct, Shantanu, that is the problem, that 6,04,000 crore for the Air India payment, but we should have done better than this, without any doubt. नहीं, कैपेक्स की वजह से लिक्विडिटी नहीं बढ़ेगी राहुल, इस पॉइंट को मत एक्सेप्ट करना. Capex will not increase liquidity because Capex will create output also. Don't accept that point. Yes, they have included for loan payments, Arun. Okay. Princey, in electricity reforms, they are covering increasing electronic metering, improving the recovery of loans on it, and so on. In my notes that I have given you, you will find it actually. Okay, the 4 electricity reforms expected, just check my notes on public finance in the 15th Finance Commission part. You will see that over there. No. One state, total all states can borrow 1 lakh crore Vamsi. Investing in BSNL is again a capex, Naveen. Thank you, Alpha 301. ओके हाँ, नहीं राहुल, वो तो ठीक ही करते हो, पूछते रहो जरूर. मैं तो तुम्हें बताता ही रहना चाहता हूँ, चाहो तो मेरा बस चले तो रोज मिल लूँ तुम लोगों से एक बार, वो बस परमिशन नहीं मिलता अपने शेड्यूल की वजह से. माय शेड्यूल डजंट परमिट मी टू मीट यू, अदरवाइज आई वुड लव मीटिंग यू ऑल एवरी डे. लेट्स सी. सो टैक्स प्रपोजल्स एंड रेवेन्यूज ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट, लेट्स सी दैट. तो पहले टैक्स प्रपोजल की बात कर रहा हूं क्योंकि प्रीलिम्स में इससे सवाल आ सकते हैं और इसकी छोटी छोटी मीनिंग्स समझ लो आप. तो पहली बात, पर्सनल इनकम टैक्स नो चेंज. इंडिविजुअल्स पर जो इनकम टैक्स लगता है उसमें देयर इज नो चेंज. सरकार ने कोई बदलाव नहीं किया पर्सनल इनकम टैक्स के रूल में. तो पहली बात तो ये आसान बात है, यही दिमाग में रख लो. सेकंड, tax on digital assets. So there will be a 30% tax on capital gains plus 1% tax deducted at source to report transaction. So tax on digital assets, 30% टैक्स ऑन कैपिटल गेन्स. तो जब ये डिजिटल असेट्स है ना, ये मेनली बात हो रही है क्रिप्टो करेंसीज की. यहां वैसे तो बहुत सारे डिजिटल असेट्स हो सकते हैं, जैसे एनएफटी भी होता है, नॉन फंजेबल टोकन्स, लेकिन मेनली ये क्रिप्टो करेंसी की बात हो रही है. दैट देयर विल बी अ टैक्स ऑन डिजिटल असेट्स, दैट इज 30% टैक्स ऑन कैपिटल गेन्स प्लस 1% टीडीएस टू रिपोर्ट ट्रांजैक्शन. 1% का टैक्स डिडक्शन एट सोर्स भी है टू रिपोर्ट ट्रांजैक्शंस, कि क्या ट्रांजैक्शन आप कर रहे हो उसके लिए. नाउ द गुड थिंग अबाउट दिस डिजिटल टैक्स इज that it is giving some hope to the traders in these assets that the government might accept cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. as a type of formal currency, a formal asset. करेंसी तो नहीं मानेगी सरकार उसे, उसको पैसा नहीं मानेंगे, लेकिन एक असेट मान लेंगे. जैसे घर होता है, शेयर्स होते हैं, बॉन्ड्स होते हैं, वैसे ये एक असेट बन जाए. सो वन थिंग दैट पीपल आर एक्सपेक्टिंग इज दैट इफ द गवर्नमेंट विल ऑफ कोर्स नॉट एक्सेप्ट डिजिटल करेंसीज एज करेंसीज, बट इट विल बी विलिंग टू एक्सेप्ट इट एज असेट, एंड देन दे कैन फ्रीली ट्रेड इन इट, गेन on it, and 30% tax has to be paid on it. The government says that we are discussing how we will accept assets or not, but we are putting a tax because people are earning money out of it, and we want to make sure that all gains made in India are taxed in a similar manner. So if we are putting a tax on shares, if we are putting a tax on gold, if we are putting a tax on bonds, and if we are putting a tax on house, then there should be a tax also on the other asset like cryptocurrency or digital asset. So that is why they say that this has been introduced. The proposal is this. Some people say that this will discourage trading in digital asset. That is to be observed. ये देखना पड़ेगा. उम्मीद बहुत कम है, क्योंकि जो ट्रेडिंग हो रही है डिजिटल एसेट में इंडिया में, कम से कम ये टैक्स लगने के बाद वो वैल्यूज बढ़ ही गए और ट्रेडिंग ज्यादा हो गई, क्योंकि लोगों को उम्मीद बन गई कि अब सरकार इसको एक कानूनी स्वरूप दे देगी. दूसरी बात, 1% TDS will make sure that you can find out where the transaction is taking and who are the people involved, I mean which kind of URLs are involved. So that gives more legitimacy to these transactions. So that is another tax proposal that has been brought in it. That is another tax proposal that has been brought on in it. Now legalized later, it's possible. Flat tax means whatever gain you make, you will have to pay a tax on that. Also remember, the losses cannot be cancelled. बाकी assets में क्या है कि अगर आपका नुकसान हुआ है और गेन भी हुआ है, तो आप नुकसान को गेन के साथ कैंसिल कर सकते हो. सपोज आई सोल्ड सम असेट वर्थ 100 rupees for 90 rupees, then I have a loss of 10 rupees. Now if I make a gain of 15 rupees, then my net obligation will not be 15 to pay the tax, but only 5. मान लो मैंने एक असेट बेचा जिसपे 10 रुपए का नुकसान हो गया, और एक असेट खरीदा जिसपे 15 रुपए का फायदा हो गया, तो मेरा नेट टैक्सेबल वैल्यू 5 रुपया होगा, 15 नहीं. If I sell one asset, lose 10 rupees, and I sell another asset, gain 15 rupees, then my net obligation will not be 15 rupees to pay tax, but 5 rupees. But in case of digital assets, the government says losses cannot be cancelled. If you have made a loss in selling the asset in the past, you cannot cancel it to cover the gains. So losses cannot be cancelled in case of digital assets. That is why they say it is a 30% flat tax. ये नहीं कि ज्यादा गेन या कम गेन, किसी भी अमाउंट ऑफ गेन पे और लॉसेस के साथ इसको कैंसिल नहीं किया जा सकता. अनदर थिंग दैट द गवर्नमेंट हैज सेड इज third thing that the government has said is it has helped, it has made a rule that any undeclared income omission, कहीं गलती से आपसे छूट गया अपना कोई इनकम डिक्लेयर करना, can be declared next year, extra tax of 25%, and even a year after that, extra tax of 50%. Now this is something they could have improved upon. वैसे तो क्या ये एक improvement है कि पहले के comparison, पहले अगर आप भूल गए कोई टैक्स देना या अपनी इनकम रिकॉर्ड करना भूल जाते थे तो आपको पूरे पैसे पे टैक्स देना, सिर्फ लिटिगेशन में ही बात संभल सकती थी. Earlier, if you forgot paying a tax, then you could only go for litigation and there was no way out. Now the government says that you are given 2 years. If you pay the tax next year, then 25% extra tax you will have to pay, and if you pay it after 2 years, then 50%. But you can show that your income is white and you will not have to go to the court. So this is a method of making taxes more taxpayer friendly. जो taxpayers हैं उनको आसानी होगी इस tax के payment में. The third thing that the government has said, fourth rather, that the government has said is that long-term capital gains tax on selling of shares or bonds of even unlisted companies will have a surcharge of 15%. Earlier it was 25% and 37%. Like listed companies. ये भी एक important rule है. This will encourage more investment in startups. This will encourage more investment in startups. जैसे angel investors होते हैं या venture capitalists होते हैं, वो startups में ज़्यादा खर्च करने को तैयार होंगे. क्यों? The long-term capital gains tax on selling of shares or bonds of even unlisted companies. लॉन्ग टर्म कैपिटल गेन्स टैक्स होता है कि अगर आप 1 साल के बाद किसी के कंपनी के शेयर बेचते हो और उस पे आपको फायदा मिलता है 1 लाख रुपए से ज्यादा, तो आपको 20% टैक्स में देना पड़ेगा. उसके ऊपर सरचार्ज लगता था. तो अगर आप एक शेयर मार्केट में रजिस्टर्ड कंपनी का शेयर बेचते हो और ये फायदा कमाते हो तो सरचार्ज 15% का है. मतलब 20% प्लस 15% ऑफ 20%, which was 23%. But if you were buying shares and selling shares of an unlisted company and then making a capital gains, then the surcharge used to be even 25% and 37% if you were people who had income level above 2 crore and 5 crore respectively. Now the government says not a problem. Everybody has to pay a tax with a surcharge of only 15%. So now it becomes easier for people to buy the shares of unlisted companies and sell them, make capital gains, and they will have to pay lesser surcharge now. That brings unlisted companies and listed companies on the same tax platform, and that means that that will encourage more and more investments in startups. So that is another good policy made by the government. Another thing that the government has said is that cooperatives will also be now expected. This I've already told you, I hope you recollect, that the cooperatives, this I told you when I was teaching you Make in India, that cooperatives will have to pay an alternative minimum tax same way as the other new corporates. So cooperatives and new corporates will have to pay the same alternate minimum tax. So I hope you will recall. I will not discuss it again, but in our first lecture, in Make in India, the cooperative tax रिडक्शन, ये वाला पॉइंट आप यहां ऐड कर सकते हो। अगर आपसे पूछते हैं टैक्स प्रपोजल्स इन द बजट, ये वाला पॉइंट आप ऐड कर सकते हो। अगर पूछते हैं टैक्स प्रपोजल ऑन बजट, टीडीएस मींस जहां पे ट्रांजैक्शन हुआ वहीं टैक्स पे करके ही, जिसने मान लो खरीदा आपसे क्रिप्टो करेंसी, वो टैक्स डिडक्ट करके आपको पेमेंट करेगा। टीडीएस का मतलब होता है टैक्स डिडक्शन एट सोर्स, ये सरकार के ही पास जाता है। ऑलराइट, no Khushbu, this will rather encourage the companies to get listed, because getting listed has other benefits also. You don't get listed only for the purpose of saving a tax, you get other benefits like easy credit, etc. Now the other thing is, the other thing that they have done, this also I have taught you in the Make in India part with the cooperative part itself. New companies and startups have been given 1 year extra to start production. So these points we have covered in Make in India. Please use your discussion there in my second lecture. तो मैं इस पे टाइम नहीं लगा रहा क्योंकि वो unnecessary आपका टाइम वेस्ट करूंगा मैं. So I will not put time on that. So these are the major tax reforms, 6. And then there is one more thing. Customs duty have been revised for many inputs to remove the problem of inverted duty structure. Inverted duty structure is taxing more on raw material and less on finished goods. That is inverted duty structure, taxing more on raw material and less on finished goods. And this discourages production in your country, because then you are incentivizing people to import the finished goods rather than importing raw material into the country. ये तो आपके कंट्री के प्रोडक्शन को कम कर देगा, क्योंकि आप लोगों को इंसेंटिवाइज कर रहे हो कि फिनिश्ड गुड्स ज्यादा प्रोड्यूस करें रादर देन रॉ मटेरियल इन योर, ज्यादा इंपोर्ट करें रादर देन इंपोर्टिंग द रॉ मटेरियल एंड प्रोड्यूसिंग इट इन योर कंट्री. ये नहीं इंकरेज कर रहे हैं आप लोगों को कि रॉ मटेरियल इंपोर्ट करके और अपने देश में चीजें बनाए. रादर आप क्या कर रहे हो कि लोगों को कहते हो इससे अच्छा तो फिनिश्ड गुड ही मंगा लो. मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल देता हूं. फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ यू आर टैक्सिंग एलईडी ट्यूब्स हायर, and if you are taxing microchips higher, but if you are taxing mobile phones at a lower rate, then you are encouraging people to buy mobile phones rather than buying LED tubes, microchips and manufacturing mobile phones in the country. That is the government trying to rectify that. But there are 3-4 things that you need to take care of in this taxation mechanism. So please be careful and listen to me. Again, analysis point of view, that how government has improved resources, but few things are still missing. All right. So what the budget could have done? इसके अलावा budget क्या कर सकता था कि taxes को बेहतर बना सके? So, 1, tax GDP ratio has declined from last year, which is an implication of rising inequality. यहां सरकार ने कोई पॉलिसी नहीं दिया. नो पॉलिसी प्रेस्क्रिप्शन इन द बजट. बजट खामोश है इसको लेकर, कुछ बोले ही नहीं कि कैसे टैक्स जीडीपी रेशियो बढ़ाएंगे, कैसे इनइक्वालिटी कम करेंगे. चर्चा ही नहीं की. There was no talk about how they will reduce tax to GDP, increase tax to GDP ratio, how they will reduce inequality. Because remember, India's tax to GDP ratio, this tax to GDP ratio is budgeted at 10.7% in 2022-23, and this has been hovering in this zone 11%, 10%, इसी बीच में ये घूमता रहा है पिछले 30-35 सालों से. We have to improve this because rich have to be taxed a little better, and those rich especially who are not brought in the tax net, टैक्स के लगाने पे बहुत सारे अमीरों पे हम टैक्स लगा ही नहीं रहे. तो एक तो ये इंप्रूव करना पड़ेगा. There is one thing we need to improve. Second thing is the share of indirect tax to direct tax is 49% to 51% in total tax collection, which is lesser than 45% to 55% reached in 2018-19. पिछले 3-4 सालों से फिर इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स का शेयर बहुत बढ़ रहा है. Last 3-4 years the share of indirect tax is rising, and indirect tax is considered to be more punishing for the poor. गरीबों के लिए ज्यादा परेशानी है ये, क्योंकि चीजों का दाम बढ़ाता है. Indirect tax increases the price of commodities and more punishing for the poor. Direct tax is applied on the rich. जो अमीर हैं उन पे डायरेक्ट टैक्स, इनकम टैक्स, वेल्थ टैक्स, कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स, ये डायरेक्ट टैक्सेस होते हैं. ये रिच पे ज्यादा लगेंगे, लेकिन इनका प्रपोर्शन कम होता जा रहा है, इनडायरेक्ट का ज्यादा. इस पर भी सरकार ने कोई बात कही नहीं. द गवर्नमेंट हैज नॉट सेड एनीथिंग रिगार्डिंग दिस. दैट्स अगेन समथिंग दे शुड वेक अप टू. ये थोड़ा जागना जरूरी है उनका. और क्या कॉम्पोजिशन है, अब ये प्रीलिम्स पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से आपको बता रहा हूं, तो मेरी बात ध्यान से सुनना. द गवर्नमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स, they project that they will collect 7,80,000 crore from GST, which is the highest tax bracket system. The total taxes में कभी कभी प्रीलिम्स में पूछते हैं कौन सा टैक्स सबसे ज्यादा रिटर्न दे रहा है सरकार को, और उसके बाद कौन सा है, उसके बाद कौन सा है. You know, so these are the things they always ask you. So please keep it in mind that the projection is that GST will be giving the government 7,80,000 crore highest, followed by corporate tax, tax on profit of the companies 7,20,000 crore, and followed by personal income tax, that is 7 lakh crore. You know, these are the top 3. अगर पूछेंगे पैसा कहां से सबसे ज्यादा आ रहा है सरकार के पास, जीएसटी से 7,80,000 करोड़, 7,20,000 करोड़ कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स और 7 लाख करोड़ पर्सनल इनकम टैक्स. This is where the money is coming in for the government. So the money is coming in from these 3 sources majorly. Other than that, एक जगह जहां हमें निजात नहीं मिल रही वो है एक्साइज ड्यूटी ऑन फ्यूल. यू नो, सो अदर इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स. अब ये अदर इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स में एक्चुअली एक्साइज ड्यूटी ऑन फ्यूल सबसे ज्यादा है. दैट इज स्टिल अराउंड 3,35,000 करोड़. वैसे तो सरकार ने थोड़ा घटाया है इसको, पिछले साल तक 3,94,000 करोड़ था, लेकिन अभी भी 3,35,000 करोड़ है. मेजरली ऑन फ्यूल, पेट्रोल पे, डीजल पे, इन पे अभी भी धांसू टैक्स लग रहा है हमारे यहाँ. 3,94,000 करोड़ था ये पिछले साल. सरकार ने थोड़ी कृपा की है, कहते हैं इस साल आपसे 3,35,000 करोड़ ही लेंगे. सो दिस इज व्हाट दे हैव डन दिस ईयर. यू नो दैट दिस इज व्हाट दे हैव डन दिस ईयर. नाउ दिस मीन्स, हाँ करेक्ट, बहुत सारे अमीरों पे टैक्स नहीं लगता, आप सही कह रहे हो. The real problem of implementation is issues Bhavya and others who are asking me is the political economy and sometimes not having the courage to do that. Well, the corporate tax has shown some buoyancy, Harshita. You know, corporate tax, we have seen growth where the reforms have been done, but income tax there has been no reform, you know, and that is where the problem is. Yes, these are all budgeted amount. You know, these are all budgeted amount. No, these are taxes, excise duty on petrol, diesel, etc. So these are taxes like that. So remember, this is where what we see, and we see that these are the four major components of tax that the government plans to collect. And that is where the share of indirect tax is pretty high, GST, other indirect tax, and so on. And then there is another service tax also that the government has planned. You know, there is a service tax also that the government has planned. That is around 1,000 crore. You know, this is 1,000 crore of service tax that also they have suggested they will be taking. You know, that also they have 2,000 crore, I'm sorry. 2,000 crore service tax. So this is the tax collection. सरकार ने दिखाया है कि ये हमारा tax collection होगा total इस साल भर में. ये budgetary estimates हैं. इसमें से करीब 7 लाख 8 लाख करोड़ रुपए स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को चले जाएंगे और बाकी सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पास रहेगा. So center's net tax revenue will be 17 lakh crore, 7 lakh crore will go to the state government. तुम्हें इतना रटने की जरूरत नहीं, बस top 3 याद रखो. प्रीलिम्स में ऐसी हरकतें होती हैं कभी कभी. Just remember that highest tax will come from GST, then corporate, and then personal income tax. You know, that is how it is. 1, 2, 3. Last year also it was 1 GST last year, 2 personal income tax, and 3 corporate tax. तो पिछले साल भी 1, 2, 3 ऐसे ही था. इस साल बस कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स ज्यादा हो गया और पर्सनल इनकम टैक्स कम हो गए. यू नो, दिस ईयर कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स इज मोर एंड पर्सनल इनकम टैक्स इज लेसर, स्लाइटली लेसर. तो ये पिछले 2 सालों की कहानी है. आप इस साल वाला याद रखो, ये बजटरी एस्टिमेट है और ये जो 1, 2, 3 लिखा मैंने, ये रिवाइज्ड एस्टिमेट ऑफ 21-22 है. But again, prelims में ऐसी हरकतें करते हैं. They ask you these things sometimes in prelims, so you should know. Okay, and then there is another. So I told you that the other problem is share of indirect tax to direct tax has risen, and the third problem is 3. The government has not given any roadmap for reforming income tax. For example, reducing tax slabs in the new system, or increasing standard deductions for salaried people, which can add to expenditure capacity of households. Remember, आपको पहली क्लास में मैंने बताया था कि consumption demand बहुत कम होता जा रहा है, and since consumption demand is decreasing, we will have to take steps to promote them. So government was expected that they could reduce tax slabs. You know, एक काम सरकार से expected था कि ये कर लें कि टैक्स स्लैब्स को रिड्यूस कर लें. जो नया टैक्स सिस्टम पिछले साल लेकर आए थे, उसको अगर आप याद करो तो टैक्स स्लैब्स बहुत सारे डाल दिए हैं. यू नो, 2 लाख टू 5 लाख, 5 लाख टू 7.5 लाख, 7.5 lakh to 10 lakh, 10 lakh to 12.5 lakh, 12.5 lakh to 15 lakh, and then 15 lakh and above. Too many tax slabs. So one, they are expected to reduce that. Second, we are expecting them that they will increase the standard deductions, that is the amount allowed to salaried people to deduct while paying taxes. This is extra money given by the government in the hands of salaried. Also, what is expected is that tax amount will go up, as in today we are starting the tax system from 2,50,000 rupees per annum. If we can increase it to something like 5 lakh rupees or 6 lakh rupees, that will again give more money in the hands of the people to spend. Remember, very high fuel tax and less concessions on income tax have become a reason with the rising unemployment that has discouraged consumption. ये एक कारण बन गया अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ने के साथ साथ, जिसने कंजम्पशन को डिस्करेज किया है भारत में बहुत ज्यादा. in the last 3-4 years. So these are the expectations, that if budget can improve upon these, then the system can be much better. Yes, that is the share of center, Ankur. In GST, it is the share of center. It is not combined CGST and SGST. It is only the share of center. All right, please keep in mind we are discussing central budget. Yes, the budgeted proportion of direct to indirect tax is not ideal. I already told you it is not ideal. It should be 40-60 at least. Indirect tax should not be more than 40% even today in India. It is the tax to GDP ratio in India has gone down. You asked me this question, Princey. It has gone down mainly because GDP has increased this year much faster than the increase in tax rate. So we expect it to be much better, in the coming future. That is what we expect it to be. Now I take you into the next discussion. This was on taxation that I was discussing with you. ये major factors हैं taxation के जो तुम्हें दिमाग में रखना है. Now I am taking you into the next discussion, that is, ये आप में से 2-3 लोगों ने मुझे कहा अभी डिस्कस करने को, तो मैंने कहा ठीक है, जैसा मैंने कहा मैं आपकी बात कैसे मना कर सकता हूं. बजट एंड फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन. फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन का मतलब होता है, जब भी आप ये देखते हो, फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन मीन्स reducing deficits in the budget by improving efficiency in revenue generation and reducing wasteful expenditure along with better targeting of subsidies. Fiscal consolidation is reducing deficits in the budget by improving efficiency in revenue generation and reducing wasteful expenditure with better targeting of subsidies. Consolidate करने का मतलब क्या करता होता है? आप सोच के देखो, हिंदी में बड़ा अच्छा शब्द है इसके लिए, सुदृढ़ बनाना. Consolidation is सुदृढ़ता. कि आपने अपने बजट को सुदृढ़ बनाया. सुदृढ़ कैसे बनाओगे? हाउ विल यू कंसोलिडेट इट? बाय मेकिंग श्योर, नॉट बाय स्पेंडिंग लेस नेसेसरीली. ये नहीं कि खर्चा कम कर दिया तो बजट कंसोलिडेट हो गया, या टैक्स ज्यादा कलेक्ट कर लिया तो बजट कंसोलिडेट हो गया. ये नहीं होता कंसोलिडेशन का मतलब. कंसोलिडेशन मींस दैट या तो आप खर्चे करो, टारगेट बेटर करो सब्सिडीज को, और जो वेस्टफुल खर्चे हैं, जैसे एक प्रोजेक्ट शुरू किया, उसको खत्म करने में 10 एक्स्ट्रा साल लगा दिए, उस चक्कर में 1 लाख करोड़ फालतू खर्च कर दिया. एक प्रोजेक्ट शुरू किया, उसको कंप्लीट किया ही नहीं, उस चक्कर में खर्चे बढ़ते गए. लोगों को एम्प्लॉय किया लेकिन उनसे काम ले ही नहीं रहे हैं, वहां खर्चे बढ़ते चले गए. ये गलत खर्चे हैं बजट में. और वैसे ही व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट इंप्रूविंग एफिशिएंसी, सो आई विल रिपीट दिस इन इंग्लिश, द एक्सपेंडिचर पार्ट. When you don't target your poors well, you are not doing fiscal consolidation. When you employ people but don't take good work from them, you are not doing fiscal consolidation. When you are spending money on a project but not completing it on time, you are not doing fiscal consolidation. So these are the things that the government is not working very well on fiscal consolidation. Now, if you see, if we check the deficits, fiscal deficit, which is the borrowing requirement of the government, revenue deficit, which says how much of the current expenditure are you meeting from your current receipts. आप आज के खर्चे, आज की ही इनकम से कितना मीट कर पा रहे हो. मतलब आज के खर्चे मीट करने के लिए आपको बोरो नहीं करना पड़ रहा. That is revenue deficit. And then there is primary deficit, that is fiscal deficit minus interest payment, कि आपके fiscal deficit में कितना हिस्सा interest payment खा रहा है. How much of your fiscal deficit is because of interest payment? Because remember, interest payments are on past loans, not on current loans, and this is for central government. So fiscal deficit, the revised estimate is 6.9% of GDP. That is the revised estimate for fiscal deficit in 2021-22. That the revised estimate for fiscal deficit is 6.9%. The government says they will make it 6.4%, next year. Similarly, revenue deficit has seen some sharp decline. So they have said they will make it 6.4% next year. Revenue deficit, which was pretty high just 2 years back, that has been reduced quite a bit. So revenue deficit was 5.1% in the budgetary estimate. The government could make it 4.7% of GDP in the revised estimate, and the government further says that by next year it will be 3.8% of GDP. Again, prelims point of view से ये number याद रख लो. Statements आ सकते हैं prelims exam में. Prelims point of view में से ये numbers याद रख लो. Statements आ सकते हैं prelims exam में. And then the primary deficit is 3.3% of GDP. Government says by next year they expect it to be approximately 2.8%. So lower deficits are good news, no doubt about that. अगर आपका deficit कम होता है तो अच्छा समाचार है, लेकिन आपका deficit अगर कम हो रहा है subsidies को इतना कम करके कि गरीब सफर करने लगे, वो गड़बड़ है. आपका deficit कम हो रहा है फ्यूल पे टैक्स लगा के, डीजल पेट्रोल पे टैक्स लगा के, वो गड़बड़ है. तो यहां थोड़ी गड़बड़ियां हैं हमारे बजट में, सरकार को थोड़ी सुधार करनी पड़ेगी. There are issues in our budget here. The government will have to make improvements. I am taking you into that aspect of the discussion only, that when you look at the deficit concepts in India, we have come back to the glide path. The government projects that we will reduce it, but please don't forget that this is only central government deficit, and then state governments will have their own deficits, which will be around 4% of GDP. That means we are still having 10.4% of GDP as fiscal deficit. Now let's analyze it quickly, 10 minutes, and we will have a decent analysis of what these deficits are. So we first talk about the positives of reducing deficit, the consolidation. 1, it will help in reducing debt to GDP ratio, which will give better macroeconomic stability. आपके सरकार का लोन जो है वो थोड़ा कम होगा तो डेफिनेटली मैक्रोइकोनॉमिक स्टेबिलिटी आएगी. लाइक डेट टू जीडीपी रेशियो is projected at around 90% at the moment in India, while the 15th Finance Commission has suggested that government should work to reduce it to 60% of GDP in the long run, center and state both. So 40% by center and 20% by state. ये 15th फाइनेंस कमीशन ने कहा है कि अगले 4-5 सालों में सरकार को कोशिश करके ये डेट टू जीडीपी रेशियो 60% पे लाना चाहिए, 40% सेंटर का रहना चाहिए, 20% स्टेट का. राइट नाउ it is almost 60% for central government and 30% for state government. So at the moment the debt to GDP ratio has gone high. That's understandable, it's because of the COVID, but the long-term planning should be to reduce it. The second thing that we see positive in it, so the idea should be to reduce it. The second thing that we see positive in it is there is deficit due to capital expenditure. That is the second thing, that there is deficit due to capital expenditure. Capital expenditure की वजह से deficit ज़्यादा है. There is deficit or more deficit due to capital expenditure. You know, more and more deficit is there because of capital expenditure. You know, so we have more deficit now because of capital expenditure, which is good due to capital expenditure, which will add to capacity, of GDP production in future. You know, GDP growth in future. अगर आज capital expenditure करेंगे तो फ्यूचर में जीडीपी ग्रोथ होगा तो लोन को वापस करना उतना मुश्किल नहीं रह जाएगा. टुडे इफ वी डू कैपेसिटी एक्सपेंशन then future GDP growth will be better and it won't be that difficult to pay back the loans. And third, revenue deficit has fallen sharply from, and remember during COVID period, revenue deficit had become very huge. In fact, revenue deficit had reached 7% of GDP. So from above 7% of GDP in 2020-21 to below 4% by 2022-23, which means wasteful expenditure has been reduced. तो ये तीन तो अच्छी बातें हैं हमारे deficit concept में, that revenue deficit which has fallen sharply from above 7% of GDP to now below 4% by 22-23. So these three things are still good news with respect to the deficit concept. You know, the basic deficit concept, these are the three good news about it. You know, कि आपका fiscal deficit का quality अच्छा है, debt GDP ratio कम होने की उम्मीद है और revenue deficit कम हो रहा है. अगर तुम्हें fiscal deficit, revenue deficit इनका मतलब नहीं पता तो NCERT मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स खोलना, उसमें बजट का चैप्टर है, उसे रीड कर लेना. मेरी ये बात तब बेहतर समझ आएगी, नहीं तो अभी ये बाउंसर लग रहे होंगे ऊपर ऊपर से जाते हुए. You know, so in case your concepts on revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, etc. are weak, please open up NCERT macro, read the chapter on budget, you will easily get it. But do that. ये important बातें हैं, वरना मैं आपका और खुद का टाइम कभी खराब नहीं करता. So I'm using this because I expect that one of these can be there in your paper. But now, what is the problem in the controlling fiscal deficit that we see? So we get into that. Challenges. 1. Wasteful expenditures like high subsidy on power, continues without better targeting. Then remember, the second is reduction in food subsidy is not ideal, especially with threat of K-shaped recovery. If you recall the first class, I told you about K, V, etc. And poor condition of deprived in India. सरकार कहती है कि हमने फूड सब्सिडी कम कर दिया. मैं आपको ये इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ में भी सिखा रहा था 2 दिन पहले. When I took the second class, I told you that government has reduced the food subsidy giving 2 reasons. Government has reduced the food subsidy giving 2 reasons. One, they said that we don't need to provision for Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana. And second, they said that all dues of Food Corporation of India has been paid back. 2 things they said, that we don't have to provision for Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, and second they said all dues of Food Corporation of India have been paid back. True, this has happened, but the number of poors in India is still very high. People under distress because of COVID pandemic is very high, and we need more food subsidy, because if people can get food subsidy, it will allow them to use the money left over for other purposes, and nutrition security is also required in India. So then it doesn't look good that we have gone for a reduced food subsidy this year. We could have improved upon this. So this is our second challenge. Ideally, the government should try making sure that food subsidy is not reduced majorly, but we have reduced it this year. Third is the allocation for Manrega has been reduced from 98,000 crore in 21-22 to 73,000 crore, the budgetary estimate, in 22-23. Ab ye, in spite of signals of high demand, अब सरकार कहती है एक अजीब सी बात. अगर आप सरकार के फैन हो तो मेरे साथ बेयर करना, लेकिन सुनना इसे ऑब्जेक्टिवली, मेरी बात ऑब्जेक्टिवली सुनना. सरकार कहती है चिंता की क्या बात है, जब भी जरूरत होती है हम बजट बढ़ा तो देते हैं. The government says nothing to worry, whenever needed we increase the budget. The problem is right now around 10,000 crore rupees is unpaid in Manrega on materials that have been bought, and 3,500 crore rupees of unpaid wages are there. तो 3,500 करोड़ के वेजेस नहीं पे हुए हैं और 10,000 करोड़ का मटेरियल का कॉस्ट नहीं दिया गया है. तो 13,000 13,500 करोड़ का तो खर्चा है जो अभी होने ही वाला है, इस साल नहीं, वो पिछले साल के खर्चे हैं. अब जब हम जानते हैं डिस्ट्रेस बढ़ा है, अगर आप पहले से प्रोविजन नहीं करते हो तो इसकी एलोकेशन देर से होती है, और ये जो ड्यूज मैं आपको बता रहा हूं ये साल दर साल चलते रहते हैं और वर्कर्स को इससे बड़ी डिप्राइवेशन हो जाती है. So it's always good to provision right in the beginning for a higher amount, so that everybody knows that this money has to be given, and then people can be helped better, because better planning can be done for that. And then there is an added problem in a similar context, that is the budget has not given any roadmap to develop an urban unemployment guarantee scheme. At least for women, to improve social security and increase their participation in workforce. This is another thing that is the missing link, that there is no roadmap to develop an urban unemployment guarantee program, at least for the women. Kerala has it in the state government, Tamil Nadu has it, some small, Kerala's urban unemployment guarantee program for women is quite a well developed one. So there can be similar programs that can be developed by central government. Some benefits can go to the people, especially, I repeat, during COVID, when many have become jobless, when many are living in distress. These small things can improve upon the benefits. I suggest please do not mention wealth tax. Oxfam has suggested it, but wealth tax मत mention करना. मेरे हिसाब से वो बहुत अच्छा exercise नहीं है. Okay. Overall, you should always write on these things that fiscal consolidation is a good idea, but there cannot be a fiscal consolidation without upliftment of the most vulnerable section. So fiscal consolidation is always a good idea, but there cannot be a consolidated fisc unless the underdeveloped section, the deprived sections are uplifted. Now I take you to the last discussion for today, which is a talk on announcement for central bank digital currency. I will do a very small discussion because you will need some money and banking behind you, but I am assuming that those of you who have a basic idea can understand it a little bit. So primary deficit target can be lesser provided your old loans have been paid back, Chahat. Revenue deficit cannot include capex, Ravi. You ask me that how reduction in primary deficit would be better for the economy. Mayank, primary deficit shows high interest obligation. अब सोचो पिछले लोन पे जो इंटरेस्ट दे रहे हो उससे तुम्हारी इकोनॉमी में डेवलपमेंट का कोई काम नहीं हो रहा है, तो इससे अच्छा इंटरेस्ट को पे बैक करो किसी तरह. 20,000 करोड़ से ऊपर का ये पेमेंट दिया जा रहा है. No, the amount of unpaid wages, Tasmiya Taleha, I am answering your question. The impact of unpaid wages is 3,358 crore, and raw material price and equipment price not paid is 11,000 crore, not 21,000 crore. Yes, why not? A fiscal council can be thought over. No, the people you are giving subsidy to in Par, Naveen, are rich people. Why incentivize them by asking them to use less? Please keep that in mind. Unemployment cannot be targeted via budget. We have already discussed it, Vikas, when I discussed with you inclusive growth, that there is nothing for unemployment removal here. No, not necessarily, Dibyendu. Urban job guarantee may not necessarily make urban centers more populous if you run it with a rural job guarantee. Wealth tax is not a good option because we don't have much of a data, So without much of a data, how do you run this wealth tax? Think about it, TK. We already had wealth tax till 2015. Due to lack of data, this was the problem we faced. That we had to remove it and replace it with a surcharge on higher income in India. No, not a problem. Government expenditure doesn't need to be reduced, Satabdi. Government expenditure needs to be consolidated, spent at the right place. That is the point. Capex और मनरेगा दोनों कर सकते हैं पार्थ, अगर फ्री में पैसे बांटना छोड़ दें तो. Thank you, Amit. Means a lot. Yeah, that's enough for budget. Don't worry. I can say this with all responsibility and humility. Okay. Let's get into the zone again. So remember, इसके central bank digital currency को मैं CBDC बोलूँगा. So central bank digital currency is proposed in the budget. With legislative reforms. So a central bank digital currency will be issued by RBI and will be developed through blockchain technology. Now government has been talking about it for some time, that you can use blockchain technology and we can develop central bank digital currency, and that will help India in meeting the challenge created by cryptocurrency, etc. People will get the same convenience and get it legally. So the benefits that we think of central bank digital currency, benefits: one, it doesn't compromise RBI's position as the sole authority or keep it as the only authority to issue currency. So monetary management will be easy, that will mean monetary policy management can be easily done. मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी आरबीआई के ही हाथ में रहेगा, उनकी अथॉरिटी पे कोई असर नहीं पड़ेगा. सेकेंड, इट विल मेक ट्रांजैक्शंस मोर कन्वीनियंट and backed by blockchain records. So via blockchain records, the digital transactions will have a trail. तो आप पता कर सकते हो किसने किसको क्या पेमेंट दिया, क्योंकि आरबीआई इस इशू की करेंसी के इशूअर होंगे. तो ब्लॉकचेन टेक्नोलॉजी इशूअर को बता देती है कि कौन से यूआरएल से पेमेंट की गई है. So that will mean convenience in doing transactions, especially large transactions across the board. And third, will reduce the cost and time taken in international transfer of currency. International transfer of currency. That you can transfer currency from India to any other country and you don't have to convert it from one currency into another. The fourth thing it will do is it will remove the loss due to currency manipulation, करेंसी म्यूटिलेशन. आपकी करेंसी फट जाती है, कट जाती है, उससे जो लॉस होता है वो खत्म हो जाएगा. एंड इट विल रिड्यूस कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रिंटिंग मनी और कॉस्ट ऑफ क्रिएटिंग मनी फॉर द गवर्नमेंट. प्रिंटिंग प्रेस वगैरह की रिक्वायरमेंट कम होने लग जाएगी और सरकार का सीनियोराज जो मनी प्रिंट करने से पैसा अर्न करना है वो बढ़ जाएगा. So government will be able to make more money by printing money and their cost of printing money will become much lesser. So these are some typical advantages of a central bank digital currency, that it will preserve RBI's position as the authority to issue currency. It will make transactions convenient and backed by blockchain records, will reduce the cost and time taken in international transfer of currency, and will remove the loss due to currency mutilation, will reduce the cost of creating money for the government. ये सारी चीजें करेंगे अगर आप डिजिटल करेंसी लाते हो. लेकिन आपको चैलेंज क्या होगा? एक, आपके इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ने के चांसेस हैं क्योंकि आपके ज्यादा करेंसी सर्कुलेशन बढ़ सकती है. So there are challenges in it. Challenges: one, lack of clarity if other countries will accept digital currency as much as they do with physical currency. Because remember, many countries of the world have not made any rule regarding digital currency. So India can create its digital currency, but whether other countries will accept that physical digital currency is still questionable. Chinese have made all digital currency illegal. So until every country comes up with its own digital currency, till then exchange will still remain difficult. अगर आपको ये लगता है कि नहीं सर रुपया ही होगा डिजिटल करेंसी के फॉर्म में, तब तो कोई फायदा नहीं, क्योंकि रुपया तो आज भी डिजिटली ट्रांजैक्ट हो रहा है. So if we are planning to create rupee only as the new digital currency, it doesn't help much because rupee is still being transacted in digital form. So it has to be a new method there. And then the second challenge is inflationary tendencies can rise because money printing can become easy and circulation will be faster. And third, threat of cyber frauds makes the less literate and digitally less trained people more vulnerable to loss of wealth. आप अखबार में पढ़ते ही रहते हो, $1 मिलियन वहां से गायब कर दिया क्रिप्टो में, $50 मिलियन वहां यहां से गायब कर दिया. तो ये थ्रेट है बहुत ज्यादा, that the threat of cyber frauds makes the less literate and digitally less trained people more vulnerable to the loss of wealth. You know, that is another threat that we have in this picture. So the suggestion we will give is, the government has at the moment announced they will come up with it. All the legality has to be developed. RBI has to be brought into consultation. Their expertise should be considered. And then we can take a call whether we should go with a central bank digital currency or not. Then we can take a call on whether we should go with a central bank digital currency or not. Monetary tool, because it is like money supply, Ravi. So it's like assuming money supply. Sudhanshu, you asked me a correct question, but unfortunately this is not the place where I can answer everything there. Seigniorage is when government prints money, its value is lesser and then inflation is more. And when the inflation gives value better, lesser. So inflation की वजह से जो value गिरता है, वो सरकार को नहीं भुगतना पड़ता. You know, that is the aspect. I believe budget is a 60-40 thing. You know, budget is a 60-40 thing. 60% it is decent, 40% it is still something we are looking forward for. You know, that is budget, 60-40 thing if you ask me. And the implementation is the key. If we implement it well, why not? Then we are doing a great job. If we are not implementing it well, then it is, you know, back to term one. तो अगर इंप्लीमेंट किए ठीक से तो ठीक है, नहीं तो वही ढाक के 3 पाथ. All right. Now, no, Dibyendu, you unfortunately you are not correct on that. When you say that people are looking for savings to mitigate exigency, then that should have meant that our savings ratio should have increased approximately by same value as the consumption ratio has fallen. But if you see, consumption has fallen by 5% of GDP and savings has increased by only 1.5% of GDP. So Dibyendu, I can believe you understand then that this is a problem. You can't say that since people are saving more, hence they are consuming less. That's not true in terms of data. True, Jia, you are right. No, transactions are not completely recorded in other digital currencies. In other digital currencies, you will have to make sure that those who are the issuers of currency are willing to share with you all the data, which is not necessarily true that they will share the data. So remember, that is one problem. And the idea of authority is not a fundamentally opposing idea to decentralization. The idea of a controlling authority is opposed to that, Palash. So improve upon both those thought processes. I hope you can think over these points. All right, so please keep thinking on these points, that will help you. CBDC will have the same impact on banks as printing money. Rather, 5% GDP target is pretty okay, Satabdi. They say that inflation will be only 3%. That's a little less ambitious if you ask me. Okay then, I'll say a bye-bye to you here. I am done with the discussions with you now. You know, some of you asked me on environment. I'll quickly repeat the points for you. You can talk on environment related things. You can talk about government now initiating the talks, the promotion for electric vehicles by allowing for exchange of batteries. That's one. Government talking about putting tax on unblended petrol and diesel which is imported. That is two. Government promoting green energy by 19,500 crore rupees on solar energy promotion. ये सब आप लिख चुके हो मेक इन इंडिया वगैरह में और इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर वगैरह में. That's three. Government promoting digitalization of agricultural production and education, etc. That's four. Government going for natural farming rather than chemical farming. That's five. And government going for green bonds to be issued for generating money from the market to fulfill these obligations. That can be six. So all these points you can write when it comes to steps taken in the budget to promote environment. Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye-bye. Hope to see you soon with the economic survey discussions. Hopefully by the end of this week, we will begin with the first chapter on economic survey. Thank you. Have a great night. God bless you all. Bye-bye from my side. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Anushka, for saying this. Yes, GST compensation should be extended. Love you all too. Thanks a lot. Lots of love from my side too. Policy for SEZ, we will have to wait, Vamshi. What is the policy for SEZ? Thank you. Good night. Lots of love to you. Thank you. Thanks a lot for joining the class. Thanks a lot for being here. You know, I will keep making these efforts. I keep saying you guys are my lifeline. Yes, I think eventually they will be bought into GST, but I don't know when. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for giving me these positive comments. Makes an old man like me happy. Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending the session. Thank you. Bye-bye. I'm signing off. Thanks a lot. Thank you all. Bye-bye.